By 23 years old, Cece Kang had become one of the most famous young women in the world. Not because she chased fame, not because she needed attention, but because everything she touched became unforgettable. She had designed gowns for actresses, suits for world leaders, stage looks for global performers, and private collections for families who had more money than patience. But Cece Kang did not design for applause. She designed because fashion was the first language she had ever understood. Before she could properly explain her emotions, she could sketch them. Before she knew how powerful clothing could be, she knew how it made people feel. And now, standing in Rome, Italy, during the Summer Olympics, the entire world was watching her again. This time, not for a red carpet, not for a fashion week, but for Team USA. Cece Kang had been chosen to design the official uniforms for both the United States women's and men's gymnastics teams. The announcement had shaken the fashion world. Then the first images were released, and the internet exploded. The uniforms were elegant, powerful, athletic, American. They honored the athletes without overpowering them. They were instantly iconic. Some people called it her greatest work yet. Others said she had just changed Olympic fashion forever. But Cece didn't care about the headlines. Standing beside her mother, Harper Kang, outside the Olympic Media Center, she smiled calmly as reporters shouted her name. Cece. Cece. Over here. How does it feel to represent the United States on this stage? Are you nervous? Do you realize the whole world is waiting to see your designs? Cece smiled softly. I just hope the athletes feel confident. The reporters went quiet for half a second. Then the cameras flashed even harder. Because that was Cece Kang. Brilliant, beautiful, and somehow still humble. Harper stood beside her daughter, watching with quiet pride. To the rest of the world, Cece was America's sweetheart. To Harper, she was still the little girl who used to steal her lab coats, put on plastic tiaras, and call herself Dr. Princess Designer Kang. Harper smiled at the memory. Cece turned slightly. What? Harper shook her head. Nothing, Mom. Harper laughed. I'm just proud of you. Her face softened. Thank you. Across the courtyard, someone else was watching. Alexander Sokolov, Russian Olympic boxer, gold medalist, world champion. A man the media had spent years describing as dangerous, cold, and impossible to read. They called him the Russian Titan, the Iron Bear, the man who never smiled. But standing there in Rome, Alexander didn't look dangerous. He looked frozen, because he had seen famous women before. He had met models, actresses, heiresses, athletes, women who knew exactly how beautiful they were and exactly how the world responded to them. But Cece Kang was different. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to be adored. She wasn't demanding attention. She simply existed with a quiet grace that pulled every eye in the room toward her. And somehow, when she smiled at the reporters, Alexander felt something in his chest shift. His coach stepped beside him. What are you looking at? Alexander didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on Cece. His coach followed his gaze, then gave a low laugh. Cece Kang? Alexander said nothing. You know who she is? Everyone knows who she is, Alexander replied quietly. His coach smirked. Then stopped staring before someone takes a picture. Alexander finally looked away. But it was too late. Something had already happened. Something he couldn't explain. Something deeper than attraction. It was recognition. As if his soul had noticed her before his mind understood why. He tried to shake it. He reminded himself that she was American. Famous. Protected. Untouchable. She was the daughter of Michael and Harper Kang. She belonged to a world of designers, presidents, athletes, celebrities, and billion-dollar brands. He was a boxer from Russia. His life was discipline, training, silence, wariness. He had no reason to walk toward her, no reason to meet her, no reason to believe she would ever see him as anything more than another athlete in a crowd. So he turned to leave. Then Cece laughed. Not a camera laugh. Not a polite laugh. A real laugh. Alexander stopped. Harper had said something to her, and Cece tilted her head back slightly, smiling like the whole world had disappeared for just 1 second. And in that second, Alexander knew. He didn't know how. He didn't know why. But he knew. He needed to meet her. Not because she was famous. Not because she was beautiful. But because something about her felt like home in a place he had never been. His coach touched his arm. Alexander. Alexander finally whispered. I think I just met the woman I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to know. His coach stared at him. You haven't even spoken to her. Alexander looked back at Cece. I know. And across the courtyard, surrounded by reporters, cameras, and Olympic lights, Cece Kang had no idea that her life had just changed forever. For the rest of that afternoon, Alexander Sokolov couldn't stop thinking about her. He tried. He returned to the Olympic Village, finished his training session, watched film with his coaches, even sparred 12 rounds against one of the best heavyweight boxers in Europe. Normally, boxing silenced his thoughts. Today, nothing did. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same thing. Not Cece standing before hundreds of cameras. Not the famous designer. Not America's sweetheart. He remembered the way she had smiled at the elderly janitor who accidentally interrupted her interview. He remembered the way she thanked every camera operator before leaving. He remembered the warmth in her voice when she congratulated the gymnasts instead of talking about herself. It was unlike anything he had experienced. If you're new here, welcome. In order to better understand Alexander, let's take a peek into his past. Okay, let's begin. Across the world, millions believed Alexander Sokolov was fearless. The truth was, Alexander had spent most of his life afraid. Not afraid of fighting. He had never feared another man. He feared losing the people he loved. Because he already had. Alexander was only 6 years old when a tragic traffic accident claimed both of his parents. Overnight, his entire world disappeared. The only person left was his grandmother. An elderly literature professor who lived in a modest apartment in St. Petersburg. She wasn't wealthy. She wasn't powerful. But she possessed something far greater. Wisdom. She filled their tiny apartment with books. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Pushkin, Shakespeare, Maya Angelou. She believed every child should grow up understanding both strength and compassion. Whenever Alexander became angry after losing a schoolyard fight, she would sit beside him and gently remind him. Real strength isn't measured by the punches you throw. She would place a hand over his heart. It's measured by the people who feel safe standing beside you. Alexander never forgot those words. He discovered boxing at 12 years old. Not because he wanted to hurt people. Because someone at school had been bullying another boy. Alexander stepped in. He won. The local boxing coach noticed. Within weeks, he was training every afternoon. By 16, he was the best junior heavyweight in Russia. By 19, he represented his country internationally. By 22, he stood on the Olympic podium with a gold medal around his neck. The cameras celebrated his victories. The newspapers praised his discipline. But very few people knew what happened after every championship. Alexander always returned home, placed every medal in his grandmother's hands, and quietly said, "This belongs to us." Success never changed him. He still rode the subway whenever possible, still visited the same neighborhood bakery, still remembered the names of every employee at his training facility. Reporters often mistook his quietness for arrogance. They couldn't have been more wrong. Alexander simply preferred listening over speaking. His coach, Viktor Petrov, often teased him. You know, Viktor laughed one afternoon, you're probably the only Olympic champion who spends more money on books than watches. Alexander smiled. Books last longer. There was another mystery surrounding Alexander. He had never publicly dated anyone. Journalists constantly asked why. His answer never changed. I've simply never met the right person. Most people assumed he was avoiding the question. They were wrong. His grandmother had taught him another lesson. Never marry someone because you're lonely. She would smile. Marry the person who makes solitude feel unnecessary. Alexander believed her. So he waited. Years passed. Models approached him. Influencers messaged him. Television personalities invited him to exclusive parties. He politely declined every invitation. His coaches joked that boxing had become his only relationship. Perhaps they were right. Until Rome. That evening, Alexander walked alone through the quiet streets near Piazza Navona. Rome glowed beneath amber streetlights. Musicians played violins beside ancient fountains. Couples wandered hand in hand through narrow cobblestone streets. He stopped outside a small bookstore. One book in the display window caught his attention. It was written in both Italian and English. Its title translated to, "Some souls recognize each other before they speak." Alexander stared at it for several moments, then laughed quietly to himself. "What are you doing?" he muttered. "You don't even know her." Yet his heart refused to listen to logic. Meanwhile, just across the city, Cece sat on the balcony of her hotel suite overlooking Rome. Sketchbook in her lap, pencil moving effortlessly. Harper stepped outside carrying 2 cups of tea. "You've been drawing for an hour." Cece smiled without looking up. "I know. What are you working on?" Cece turned the sketchbook. It wasn't another Olympic uniform. It wasn't an evening gown. It wasn't a celebrity design. It was simply Rome. The rooftops, the churches, the fountains, the people. Harper smiled. "You always draw places after you fall in love with them." Cece laughed. "I'm not in love." Harper raised an eyebrow. "I meant with the city." "Oh." They both laughed. After a moment, Harper asked quietly, "Has anyone caught your attention while we've been here?" Cece didn't hesitate. "No. Not even one handsome Olympian?" Cece grinned. "Mom. I'm serious." "So am I." Harper studied her daughter. "You've never worried that you've never dated?" Cece closed her sketchbook. "I grew up watching you and Dad." Harper listened. "You two ruined ordinary relationships for me." Harper burst into laughter. "What?" "It's true. You've loved Dad the exact same way my entire life. You still flirt. You still dance in the kitchen. You still hold hands. You still look at each other like you're on your first date." Cece smiled softly. "If I ever fall in love, I want that." Harper reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You deserve that." Neither woman realized. Less than 2 miles away, Alexander Sokolov sat alone in a quiet cafe, looking at a newspaper. On the front page was Cece Kang. Again, he smiled to himself, then folded the paper. "I need to meet her. Not because she was famous. Not because she was beautiful. Because for the first time in his life, someone had made him curious enough to step outside the carefully ordered world he had built." As he stood to leave, his phone buzzed. A message from the Olympic Committee. "Athletes and honored guests are invited to tomorrow evening's International Olympic Heritage Gala." Alexander read it once, then smiled, because he had just remembered. Cece Kang would be there too. Across Rome, Cece received the very same invitation. She smiled. That should be fun. Neither of them knew. By the end of tomorrow night, the first photograph of them together would change both of their lives forever. To learn what happens next, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. You definitely don't want to miss next week's episode. To be continued.